So, welcome to part 2 of this video. And if you did the assignment last week, you know exactly what we are covering in this video. We are going to be talking about this one word that made up the majority of the debates in Philadelphia. Compromises. We are going to talk about two specifically. The Great Compromise, the Great Compromise, and the Three-Fifths Compromise. And how those two compromises played a very noticeable role in the creation of our Constitution, how we know it today. So, since the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention decided to throw out the Articles of Confederation, the floor was open to many suggestions. So, we were attempting to make a brand new, spanking new Constitution because the Articles of Confederation was considered a failure to so many people. Edmund Randolph, representing Virginia, proposed a plan largely devised by James Madison. Madison, who felt like Randolph was a more powerful speaker and would be able to gain support for the plan, suggested a bicameral or two-house legislature. The legislature would be in charge when selecting a president of the United States, as well as court officials for a federal judicial system. Under Virginia's plan, populations would drive representation. So, this is the Great Compromise we are talking about. There's two different plans here. Virginia plan and New Jersey plan. And Virginia plan, so we see this split, Virginia plan and New Jersey plan. Virginia plan said it should be up should be up to population, right? So this is a distinct disadvantage to smaller states. So the Virginia plan favored larger states. Not surprisingly, delegates from smaller states resisted this plan. They feared that larger states, with their increased representation, would render the smaller states voiceless and ultimately meaningless. So they feared that larger states like Virginia, with a whole with a whole more population group, would be favored more than small states. So what are we gonna do about it? So the New Jersey plan got introduced. The New Jersey plan also offered an unicameral Congress with each state having one vote. Under this plan, Congress would sit atop the governmental hierarchy with the most power, including the powers to tax and regulate trade. The executive and judicial branches would be separate from Congress and would not be as powerful. The plan closely resembled the unicameral government described in the Articles of Confederation. So the New Jersey plans favored smaller states. And all of these, so the Virginia plan, if we want to review the Virginia plan, bicameral legislature, representation based on population. The New Jersey plan, one legislature, only one vote per state, largely resembling the governmental structure associated with the Articles of Confederation. So this all came together is what's known as the Great Compromise. So the Great Compromise is the governmental structure we have today. Two houses of Congress, representatives, House of Reps based on population, and each state has two senators. So the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan was meshed together to form the Great Compromise. Okay, this is just explaining. So the lower house being the House of Representatives, and the higher house being the Senate. So okay. So another debate was on whether slaves should be counted as people or property, because we still had this slavery issue in America. It's a dark time in our history, but we need to face it head on and acknowledge that we have that history. I'm gonna be making that video later down the line. So, although there was no intention of allowing slaves the same rights as freemen, some argued that they should be counted as people to increase the state's population count and thus the number of delegates in the lower house. Supporters of this school of thought were primarily Southerners who were eager for the power that their states would gain if the large number of slaves in the South were counted as people. So slaves as property. That's the slaves as property for population growth. So what was the issue at hand? Whether a slave should be counted towards a population number, and that is why we and the House of Representatives would be based on that population number. The South agreed with this plan. The South was all for this plan because it will increase their representation in Congress. Okay. Northerners feared an increase of power by the South that might result from counting slaves as people. So North, no go, South, yes. These delegates argued that slaves should be counted as property and thereby being taxed, so increased in taxes. Okay. The delegates argued that, okay, since doing so could bring much revenue to the federal government. Increase in taxes means increase in revenue. Eventually, the delegates compromised on the slavery issue as well. Slaves were declared to count as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of population count. However, neither the words slavery nor slave were used in the Constitution. Rather, it refers to the 3/5 compromise as applying to all other people. Still, it was apparent whom the 3/5 compromise was targeted, since it went a step further and addressed the issue of the African slave trade. Northerners expected the slave trade to dwindle and eventually became unnecessary, as they wanted the Constitution to reflect that expectation. Southerners only Southerners only knew that they had an immediate and ongoing need for slave labor in their fields and paddies, so they resisted slave trade restrictions. In addition to addressing the issues of population counts, the 3/5 compromise stated that Congress would not restrict overseas slave trade for a period of 20 years. But after that time period, they could rethink the slave trade decision. So the 3/5 compromise was a compromise that appeased both the North and South when it came to slaves. In the next outline review video, we are going to talk about this idea of Federalist versus Anti-Federalist as the basis of political parties getting too far ahead, but on the basis of allowing the Bill of Rights in or out of our Constitution. See you guys in the next one.